David spoke against my former boss, J. Hoover, like that. But I would have to agree with him because number one is by 5:30, November 22nd, 1963, on a document that I think a lot of you have seen, and he states there were teletypes in from Dallas to headquarters stating there are two suspects to interview. And on the bottom he wrote in his own handwriting, "No need to cover, we already have the subject in custody." And that's at 5:30 on November 22nd. Well, I'm here to tell you, I've never solved a case that fast. What I'd like to say opening is this. Everybody's interested in the files coming forward. Well, I bet you 10 to 1, and I say this to a lot of people, it's not what you're going to find, it's what you're not going to find. Because the fact is, if we're all here, and we're all here for the same reason, I think, we think there was a conspiracy and we think there was a cover-up. Do you think the government, after 53, 54 years, is going to give you a smoking gun? I don't believe it. And the thing about it, I think David mentioned or somebody else mentioned it, we already have the smoking guns. And I'm going to bring some of that to light today. What I'd like to do is kind of tell you my background real briefly. I started with the FBI in 1970. I was only 13 years old when JFK was killed. And trust me, I didn't work it then. A lot of people say I worked the JFK case. No, I didn't. I was 13. And I grew up in New Orleans. I went to Washington when I was 20 in 1970. Yeah, I'm close to being 68. I know there's a lot more miles in my face, but I'm close to being 68. I went as a clerk. I had 2 years of college. I finished school at night. I became an agent when I was 23. I worked organized crime in Kansas City and Chicago. Was transferred to Beaumont, Texas in 1985. Finished my career working narcotics. I worked the Mexican and drug cartels. I worked OC in Kansas City and Chicago. This story really starts then. Because when I arrived in Kansas City, I went straight to an organized crime squad and sat on a wiretap, a gambling wiretap. Back then, that's the way we got into the mob, is through gambling. And that opened the door to get wiretaps. And trust me, there was a lot said on those phones. Then I went to Chicago. In Chicago, God really blessed me with a great career. I was there in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think a lot of you have seen the movie Casino with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. I arrested Joe Pesci, the real guy, Tony Spilotro. I worked that whole case, followed the money from Las Vegas to Chicago, where Kansas City, Detroit, Milwaukee would come in and take their share, and actually saw money transferred from about half a mile away through binoculars with Tallarico from Las Vegas to Joy Ayuba. Testified twice in Kansas City, once in Las Vegas on that case. This is where I was first brought into questioning the FBI or the Warren Commission of Lee Harvey Oswald being the lone assassin. You have to understand, all the way up to that time, I was just like any other agent, and that was, well, Lee Harvey Oswald, lone assassin. We did our job with the FBI, case closed. Well, one thing that struck me in the 70s, working in Kansas City and then on to Chicago, was the fact that I look back and there was nothing done prior to me becoming an agent, or to 1972. There was nothing prior to that, but we really did anything to organize crime. Well, I think a lot of you know what happened in 1972. J. Edgar Hoover died. And I'm scratching my head and I said, how did we do what we have done since 72 on to fight organized crime? Because I tell you, in the late 70s, early 80s, we just about put them out of business. We taught them what to do, what not to do. They raised their kids to be their attorneys. And their attorneys wasn't really good before that. I testified against Tony, well, I searched Tony Accardo's house. Now, contrary to common belief, Sam Giancana was not the head of the mafia in Chicago, it was Tony Accardo. He was kind of a figurehead, as was Joey Ayuba, until Tony Accardo died. In 1978, when I arrived, I worked 5 gang-lane killings. The reason these people died and were found in trunks tortured was the fact, believe it or not, they robbed Tony Accardo's house. Somebody said, I know we had a task force of different police agencies where the body was found, and one cop said, "You gotta be kidding me. You crazy? What would happen to those guys if they burglarized Tony Accardo's house?" And I went, "Yeah. They'd be tortured and killed." It's like, what happened? Well, based on that case I worked, I had contact with Hugh Cochran, an agent out of Miami, who worked the Johnny Roselli killing, where Johnny Roselli's body was found in Biscayne Bay, cut up into many parts, dumped in a barrel in the bay. We reviewed a lot of FBI files relating to the mob and trying to come up with a common denominator on these killings. Well, while talking to him, I learned that, of course, the plot of the CIA and the mafia to kill Castro happened. And he interviewed the CIA agent that met with Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli. And I was very taken back by this. But at the same time, there was a mobster killed in Milwaukee named August Mariachi. A good friend of mine had that case. He transferred to Chicago, and he told me that he was able to identify, they recovered the weapon that killed August Mariachi, as did they recover the .22 that killed Sam Giancana. And he traced both of those weapons to the Tamiami gun shop in Miami, Florida, which was a CIA front. And he contacted the CIA requesting what they knew about the Tamiami gun shop, and hit a brick wall. Basically, no comment, don't ask. So I'm going to myself, okay, what's going on here? I mean, we got mobsters with weapons from the CIA front. What's the relationship? Well, in 1980, I had a case on an individual by the name of James Files. James Files was hijacking tractor trailer loads of goods from Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, and bringing them to Melrose Park and selling them. If anybody knows the Chicago mob, knows the area, Melrose Park was completely run by the mob. You did not do anything in Melrose Park unless you had the okay of the mob. I had a source that was into Files. We introduced an undercover agent through the source of Files. We bought 3 loads. I remember one was a load of resin oil, one was of beef. I forget what the third was. But what I would do, the undercover guy would come to me, he'd go look at the load, get numbers off the trailers. I would go back to the office and run these numbers or tags, find out it was stolen the weekend before, what the trucking company was. I contacted the trucking company. Files was asking $10,000 a load. I said, you can have your trailer back full of goods for $10,000, but we got to hold it for evidence for a while. They would ship the money, and I would buy the loads. Well, we bought 3 loads. But during that period of time, there's a lot of conversation between Files, the source, and the undercover agent, one of which being that he was taken out of his Greasy Spoon shop restaurant in Melrose Park, was maced, and went through a series of torture treatments relating after Chuck Nicoletti was killed. CIA. Well, that went right over my head. But I got to thinking about it. I said, well, number one, it wasn't the FBI. We don't do that kind of thing. Number 2, if it was the mob, they'd just go ahead and whack it. Maybe it was the CIA. That stuck with me. We did not prosecute those 3 loads. The reason being that at the same time, Files was going to Dallas, Texas, bringing hot cars down here to Dallas. Dallas indicted him. prior to us doing anything. I didn't want to blow the undercover agent on my source, so we didn't do anything with ours. I debriefed the guy involved with him for 3 days on his activities. And he, out of the clear blue, says to me, let me tell you something weird, Zach. We're going through Dealey Plaza, and this is back late 70s, okay? And James Files really got weird on me. And he made the comment, if the American people really knew what happened, they wouldn't be able to handle it. This had nothing to do with my investigation. I didn't write it down. There was no need to. It had nothing to do with the loads of beef or the Western oil or the hot cars. But it always stuck in my mind. I get transferred to Beaumont, 1992. I think it was, yeah, 1992. And front page, it must have been during November, there's an article on the conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy, written by a local writer to the newspaper, but taken from a private investigator's work, Joe West. I don't know if anybody met Joe West. I sat down and talked with Joe West. Well, what he says is Johnny Roselli, Chuck Nicoletti were the hitmen, yada, 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 yada. And I'm going to myself, these guys are real people. I work these guys. I said, this is very interesting. So I contacted Joe West. I had a sit down with Joe. And he told me he had a source that knew all about it and names Nicoletti and Roselli as the hitmen. And so I asked him, could I talk to him? He said, well, we want immunity for this guy. Well, I'm going Lee Harvey Oswald, I'm an assassin. I get immunity for that. It's easy. So I contacted the United States Attorney and, well, first I interviewed him and my supervisor came in and looked, you know, what's going on, and it just ridiculed Joe West, kicked him out of the office and said, don't ever come back to this office again. And I'm going, what's going on here? I mean, that's what we do. If a guy said he knows who killed the President of the United States, we should look into it, whether it's bull or not. Well, come to find out, my ex-supervisor was Naval Intelligence, and I'm not trying to put anything together on that, but what eventually happened is I went to the United States Attorney, got immunity for this guy. I met him in Houston with an attorney called Don Urban. I did my homework. I contacted Chicago. He said he made the silencer that killed Sam Giancana. I started interviewing him with another agent, and I caught him in a lie. About 15 minutes in, I shut the interview down, and I said, in an interview, why are you lying to me? I'm not lying. Well, I went outside. I told Joe West, don't take anything this man says to the bank, because I caught him in a lie. Well, Joe West looked like his whole life blood drained out of him, and I felt sorry for him, and I said, listen, I'll give you a good lead. The guy named James Files, I told him about the comment. Find him, he might know something. About 6 months later, I read the paper, Joe West died of a massive heart attack. Never had a heart problem before, but he died of a massive heart attack, which happens. So I said, well, that's over with. When about 2 months later, I get a phone call from this attorney's office, from this attorney, Don Urban from Houston, that we met. He said, Zach, what about James Files? I said, what are you talking about? It's over, Joe West died. He said, no, the crusade moves on with Dick Clark Productions, Dick Clark. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, well, did Joe West find Files? He said, yes, he did. I said, what did he say? He said that he took a shot from the grass. I said, no, he's the guy, Chuck Nicoletti, yada, yada, yada. Well, after I picked up the phone off the floor, put it back to my ear, I'm going, what am I going to do? And he wanted me to fly with him up to Chicago, to Joliet Prison, and interview James Files and see what I thought about it. I said, Joe, I'm an FBI agent. I can't do that. He said, I just can't go talk to a guy that said he killed the president. I said, let me work on this. And by the way, my supervisor already said, if I hear JFK or Jack or Kennedy, you're out of here. So I knew I couldn't go to him. Well, it just so happened that my agent in charge of the Houston office was my ASAC, number 2 man in Chicago. I knew him real well, good friend of mine. So I called him. I said, boss, I need to talk to you. What about? I said, well, I'd rather tell you when I get there. He said, sure, come tomorrow. I said, okay. And I said, by the way, my supervisor don't know I'm coming. He said, okay. So I go, and I walk in. And honestly and truly, I went to go hear him say, you're crazy. I went for him to tell me to forget about it. But I had a duty. I had someone say, they shot the President of the United States. And I had a duty to pass it on at least. Not make the decision to look into it, but I had a duty to pass it on. So I had to pass it on to somebody, and I couldn't do it to my supervisor. So I drove in there, and I basically told him. And he goes, well, what do you know about files? I said, well, he's a subject of mine. He's a bad dude. He's killed people. He's da-da-da-da-da. Well, I'm going to contact Chicago. I'll let you know. So I drive back. I get a phone call from him later, and he said, I talked to the ASAC in Chicago, and he hadn't yet. Don Urban, I tell Don Urban, I can't go. I said, I will give you questions to ask files. A couple of days, well, after that weekend, Don Urban gets back and says, I have a 21-page confession from James Files. I have places where he was, where he stayed, who's involved, yada, yada, yada. He sent it to me. Then I called my boss. I said, I have a 21-page confession. What do you want me to do with it? In Houston, not my boss at Beaumont. He said, fax it to Chicago. So I did, in care of the ASAC up there. Supervisor still don't know anything. Well, comes back, the supervisor said, you're going to Chicago, you're going to get a teletype, you're going to team up with another agent and go talk to Files. I think it's about time you told your supervisor. Well, I went in, he was with some other agent, I said, hey boss, I said, SAC just called, and there's a guy named James Files in Chicago who's a subject of mine, he wants to talk. They think it's a good idea if I go because I know him, nothing but Kennedy. And I wanted to get the teletype to go to Chicago. He kind of looked at me strange. He said, well, whatever. So I called Don Urban and I tell him I'm going to Chicago. And I said, I'm going to talk to James Files about organized crime. Now, I want to repeat, I'm talking about subjects in Chicago about organized crime. Now, if you should tell me about some other crime, I will listen. Well, he tells, I think some of you might know Bob Berman. Worked with Dick Clark Production. I wasn't in contact with him, but Don Urban was. And he told Bob Berman, and this is proud of me, this is like on Friday, and I'm headed to the following Tuesday, Chicago to talk to Files. I'm all excited. So, Friday night, I'm on my patio with my lovely wife, who says she's tired of hearing about JFK, trust me. And I get a phone call, and it's my supervisor. And he says, what is this about JFK? I thought I told you not to even mention his name. I go, of course, needless to say, I don't know what you're talking about. My heart's beating real fast. So that call comes. And the SAC's first comment is, Zach, what's this about JFK? I'm going, I'm done. I'm being sacrificed. I've lost my job. I'm out of here. Well, later he told me he wanted to break the ice. That wasn't a good way to break the ice, I can tell you that right now. So he says, I want you to go to the office, and I want you to write everything from day one to right now, and I want it within the hour. So I really didn't live that far from the office. Let me tell you something. My dad used to whip my butt. I lived under the Stars and Stripes. He furnished the stripes and I saw the stars. And when I knew I was going to get a whipping, That butt started burning before he put a belt to it. Well, let me tell you what, I'm driving to that office and my butt is burning. And I walked in and my supervisor has got the ego of a 747, about that, he got the little man syndrome. And I tell you what, he lit into me. I've never had an ass chewing like I had that time. His face was red. Well, my memo to the SAC was, I contacted the SAC. I went to see him. Exactly. So to get me, they had to get him too. And I survived it. But needless to say, I did not go interview files. They sent 2 agents who I had worked with. When I read their report, I knew what happened. The SAC got a call, and the reason it all blew up is because Bob Vernon called 60 Minutes and said, as an FBI agent going to Juliet prison to talk to the guy who said he killed Kennedy, what do you know? Or what do you want to know about this? Well, they called Oliver Buck-Lavelle, who's the SAC in Dallas. What do you know about this agent going? He didn't know anything, because my SAC didn't say kick in Dallas. So he called my SAC and chewed his butt out, and it all went downhill. But he called Chicago and said, there's a nut in Juliet prison that said he killed the president, go talk to him. Well, if I got information like that, I'm going to go prove this guy's a nut. And that's exactly what the 2 agents did. So I said, case closed, over with, it's over. So when I retire, I get a call from Bob Vernon, and that's when it started. I met with Dick Clark. I went and talked to James Files. I came away 50-50. He could be telling the truth, but we needed to do an investigation. Dick Clark didn't want to back it because he got burnt in '94 because they were going to, 60 Minutes was going to do a special one. So I got together with a guy named Wim Dangbar. A lot of you people have probably heard him. Wim's only problem, he's a Dutchman. And he don't get along with America. And God bless him, he means well. But, so hello Judith. And so I started, basically I went around the country interviewing CIA, FBI, and the mob. Well, I go to San Diego, California, and I'm talking to Chauncey Hope, and I think y'all heard his name, Chauncey Hope's daughter. Very impressive. There was an agent in Chicago that I worked with that was there, so I had dinner with him, or lunch with him. In the South, we call that lunch, we call it dinner supper. So I contacted him, we had a late lunch, and we talked, and all of a sudden he asked, why are you here? Well, I told him, number one, because he asked. Number two, I wanted to get some kind of feedback from my fellow agent. So I told him, and he goes, you know, he said, I said, what do you think, Art? And he says, you know what? I would think you're crazy, except for one thing. I said, well, what's that? He said, you remember Pendorf? Pendorf was a code name for the investigation on Alan Dorfman. If anybody, which I worked, because that's part of the casino. Alan Dorfman was the money man to dump the money into the central pension fund, to whereby they had 4 casinos and skimmed all the money, and we had a wiretap up on Alan Dorfman. Well, Art says, I was on the phone when Baker, he was Hoffa's flunky and Dorfman's flunky, I forget his first name, Barney Baker, something like that, was on the line, and he's in conversation telling this guy that he had numerous conversations with Jack Ruby right before he killed, before the Kennedy, came to Dallas, and also really a lot of calls with Jack Ruby prior to him killing Oswald. And he said that it's always bothered me because we were told there's no connection between Jack Ruby and the mob in Chicago. So I'm going, wow, I just learned something from my fellow agent. I'm going to Chicago the next week. And that's when I found out that Files was for real as far as his relationship with Chuck Nicoletti. That they were tight. He was kind of the chauffeur for Chucky. He admired Chuck Nicoletti. Well, I decided, I'm flying home from San Diego, knowing I'm going to Chicago, and I said, Zach, who in the heck do you think you are that you have all this information nobody else does? I said, there got to be other agents that came across something working that can help you. I had breakfast with 7 agents, retired agents that I had worked with, all organized crime connected. I got leads, just crazy. One of them, you need to talk to Jim Seibert. He was my training agent. There's something he knows because I know it. He was really disturbed about the autopsy that he viewed. Well, I did talk to Jim Seibert, and I can tell you one thing, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll say this right now, and that is to understand the JFK matter that we're all here for. You first of all have got to accept the fact that there was a conspiracy, that there was somebody else, there were 2 people involved in it. That's what forms a conspiracy. Jim Seibert and Robert McClellan, the ER doc, who I talked to, excuse me, collaborate each other and prove that there were more than 3 shots. How did they prove that? Well, number one, when I talked to Jim Seibert, he's on video, by the way, and the only video of Jim Seibert is on the documentary that I'm in, Grassy Knoll, that Wim Dankmar put together. It doesn't show him coming to my head, and I said, okay, Jim, what hole are you talking about in the back of the head? And all this is gone. The whole right portion of the back of the head is gone. Robert McClellan, have him on film, this whole time, this man was 82 at the time, he's deceased now. He died a couple of years ago. He never changed his story. But his report of 5.5 pages is, they're the only ones that had a report. Every swinging person that walked in and out of that room was recorded in his report. And the back, which a lot of you already know, was not at the neck, come out the throat. The back was underneath the shoulder blades, 2 inches to the right of the spine. And I don't really need to read that part, but Dr. Humes probed the bullet hole, and it only went, in the way it's described in the report, is your little finger. It went the length of the little finger, which means it didn't penetrate the body. So I don't know what the big deal is about this magic bullet, because the bullet never came out the other side. Now where that bullet? Don't know. But it bothered Dr. Humes, and it bothered the agents enough for the agent to call the FBI lab and talk to the firearms unit, Agent Killian, and ask them if there's such thing as an ice bullet. Because they have a hole in Kennedy's back, they can explain where's the bullet. And Agent Killian said, well, I can solve that mystery. Secret Service just brought in a bullet found on the stretcher. Well, that's the pristine bullet. Okay. Talking to Dr. Robert McClellan, Dr. Robert McClellan says that bullet, and everybody knows it at Parkland, that bullet was found on an unattended stretcher in a hallway. No blood on the sheets. There are the bullet bites. That's the pristine bullet with just a little bitty nick off of it. I don't even have to go there. I mean, come on, guys. You would rather believe our inspector than a reputable FBI agent, World War II bomber pilot, highly decorated, and a doctor of all these years, MD. I only talked to Robert McClellan about 4 or 5 years ago. And he's awesome. And everybody in the hospital knew it, okay? The thing about Seibert, the whole time I'm talking to him, He's looking at me with his eyes, and I get emotional just because this poor man lived that till he died. And he's looking at me, tell me what happened. I'm sorry, I get that way as I get older. But I can see his eyes now, just tell me what happened. Because he knows why I'm there. And it's a shame. But there, you know, I belong to the former special agents of the FBI Society. And I 50th year anniversary, they had an article in there about the different agents that participated in the investigation. Jim Cybert's one of them. And the article said, no matter how hard people tried, they couldn't get Jim Cybert to change his story. And what an honorable man. And to me, as far as the conspiracy is concerned, that is the best evidence. Forget about files, forget about Roscoe White, forget about this, forget about that. I don't think we're ever going to know. Do we know if files shot? I don't, you know. But you first have to understand that there was a conspiracy, and that does it. Well, beside the lead on Jim Cybert, I got a lead on, you need to talk to Mike Wax. Mike Wax was the undercover agent on Carlos Marcello, on Briley. He's the one that's basically sent him to jail. Now, Carlos Marcello went to Texarkana, did his time, and, wait, first, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want you to read, I want to read to you. Bear with me. Should be keeping up with my notes. Now, if anybody wants to see it later, I have the 302. We call it, the report is the 302. What happens back in that time, and even when I became an agent, you go, 5 minutes.
And then 5.
You go to interview somebody, you write notes, of course. But when you type up your report, which is an FD 302, you throw your notes away. Your notes are basically the typed up report, of which is a 5.5 page. But here's what Spectre said to the, well, matter of fact, Francis O'Neill and, I have Marcello here. Well, basically, and I want to get to that real quick, there's so much more to tell you. But Spectre writes a memo to Rankin stating that Cybert and Francis O'Neill did not take any notes. I have it. It's a memo to Rankin. Well, neither one of them testified for the Warren Commission. And you're here to tell me we conducted an investigation and witnesses of an autopsy of President Kennedy do not testify before the Warren Commission. It's just absurd to me. Okay? And if anybody has seen my documentary with Jim Cybert, you'll see that he is totally livid. But such a gentleman, he says, I said, what do you have to say about it? He said, well, that's a falsified statement. He didn't say this. Lied. But he's such a gentleman, it was a falsified statement. Well, yeah, it's false. It's a lie. Another lead I got was contact Michael Wax, who was the undercover agent. Michael Wax, along with the agent from Minneapolis, Marcello, was in Mayo Clinic, Rochester, I think it is, Minnesota. Well, Wax and this agent in Minnesota wanted to set up a scenario, he was getting senile, to have a room with literature, magazines, whatever, of 1963, and see if Carlos would revert back to it and start talking. Didn't happen. Bureau said, no, we're not going to do it. But they went and interviewed him. First of all, Wax went in. He liked Wax, even though Wax did him in. But he respected Wax. That's one thing about the mob. I clowned around with some of them in trials. They respected us. It's not what Marcello said, because he denied everything, but it's what the FBI agent from Dallas asked him. That's very interesting. And one of them, and I just talked to Judith a while ago, is asking about Murat. Are you familiar with, with the uncle? Exactly. With Emil Bruno, who was the attorney for Marcello, or Dutch Murat, to which Marcello responded, no, he did not. Marcello was reminded that Murat has worked as a bookie for his sports wire service, and Marcello stated there were many people working for him he could not recall. There were other questions asked, and I'm going to myself, where did they come up with that? You know, where did they come up with that information to ask Marcello this? I'm going to have to close here pretty quick. And I'm here till Sunday if there's any questions.
You've got 5 minutes for a question and answer.
But let me end by this. I found out, number one, that fellow FBI agents are the most easy to convince of what I'm doing. Because I work with some of the most honest Americans that could be out there. The echelon, no doubt, Cuba was had by the mob, some other things happened, but the regular agent, when I tell them what I have, facts, they are just blown away. Are you kidding me? Of course, they don't pursue it. But it's always been my hope that other agents would come out and support what I'm doing. And I tell you what, I don't know how to close this, but thanks for the opportunity and the honor to stand before you of where I'm coming from. And if y'all have any questions, I'll be here for a while. If there are any questions right now. Yes, sir.
Zach, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for being here. Carl Golub and maybe Bob Vernon somehow got a hold of that, but do you think files can be persuaded to come forth with a diary? Nicoletti,
Let's go one at a time. Not answer that one right now. No. I've talked to Bruce. He would go between files. Files through Bruce contacted me, and when he got out of prison and wanted to do something together, I said, there's only one way I'll do it. See if he gives me the diary. That he said Nicoletti put an entry in November 22nd. Well, he said no, he won't. Bob Vernon did not get that diary. I'm telling you that right now. It's still out there somewhere. If it is.
do you think there's any possibility that James Files sort of wrote himself into the script as taking the role of Nicoletti in the actual events of that day? Maybe Nicoletti was the shooter from the grassy knoll.
No doubt in my mind Nicoletti was a shooter. Now, whether or not I have people very reputable that think Files is telling the truth, only Files knows. There's no doubt in my mind he was there because I confirmed a lot of the stuff, you know, step by step as when he was in Dallas. Now, 21 years old, I don't know. Some things don't make sense, but then again, the way he says it, I've seen a lot of times where something doesn't make sense to me, and it happened.
Last point, Charles Nicoletti, did the House Select Committee on Assassinations want to speak with him? And did he? Well, he was assassinated, wasn't he?
Yeah, like I say, it's a lot more. Nicoletti came. They cooperate. Files cooperates. Chauncey Ho, Tosh Plumley cooperate. Files, and yes, Files came in the morning of. Was supposed to get in the night before. Nicoletti. Files says he don't know how he got in. Well, we know now that Chauncey Ho brought him in, and then that Roselli flew in on a military aircraft. He didn't say a MAPS flight or anything. Well, he did say Tosh Plumley flew him in. They cooperated.
And was Nicoletti murdered, assassinated about the time?
Yes. So was Lips Masseri that came in with him. So was Sam Giancana. So were a lot of other mobsters that wanted to subpoena to the House Select Committee.
Thank you.
One more thing I'd like to say on that real quick too. Both McClellan and Seibert went before the review board in the 90s was shown a picture of the official autopsy where the back of the head, there's no hole. And both of them said, I didn't see that.
Hello, my name is Richard Singerman, and my question, I know, is speculation on your end, but I'm just curious, because you're an FBI agent,
Was.
that whether you believe that J. Edgar Hoover knew about it and probably would, ahead of time.
I mean, I don't know that for a fact, based on the evidence. I
Right.
do know. One other thing I want to leave you with real quick. I'm sorry, but I got to tell you this. Number one, Nate Rogers brothers, last name Rubenstein, big money in Beaumont, told me, I asked him, I said, who do you think shot JFK? And he said, LBJ. Why do you think LBJ? He says, because Morris Jaffe, a businessman from San Antonio, told me for a fact that he went to New Orleans, picked up bags of cash from Carlos Marcel and brought it to LBJ. I confirmed that with Doug Jaffe. Number two, I don't know if people know Jack Brooks. Air Force One, when LBJ was sworn in, you look to your right, and there's a bald-headed young man, a receding hairline. That's Congressman Jack Brooks. Jack Brooks and I knew each other. I asked his son-in-law, do you think that he had talked to me? He already made a comment to an attorney that he knew there was a shot from the grassy knoll because he's a former Marine and he knows shots. So I call his secretary at 10 o'clock. She calls back immediately and says the congressman will see you at 1. When I walk into his office, I walk down the hallway, take a right, he's waiting for me. I get from about myself to you, and he looks me in the face as I'm coming. And we already know each other. What do you know? I go, wow. And I get to him, and he says it again. We walk in his office. He never would speak to me again after that. And he basically said, 3 shots from a real lone assassin. Whatever you got, take it to the FBI. Been there, done that. So as I'm going down, I looked up and I said, thank you, Congressman. You told me what I wanted to know. You know. I'm not saying he knew who did it, but he knows a couple.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Sarah Whalen. I have a question. One thing that's not clear to me, and it might be useful if you wanted to make it more clear, is whether the assassins, exactly who do the assassins work for? Clearly you fingered mafia assassins, but we know there's overlap with organized crime with LBJ. There's also, the Senate Select Committee on Assassinations makes it clear the CIA recruits mafia assassins for numerous assassinations and assassination attempts all over the world. That's well established. In fact, 2 mafia groups in Africa try to farm their assassination out on Lumumba. So what is it? Maybe the answer's not in the...
I think I've answered that already with the fact that I talked to Hugh Cochran, who stated that he talked to the CIA agent that met with Roselli and Giancana. When you talk about the mob in 1963, the mob and the CIA are the same thing. They used them to try to kill Castro, and I can go on and on and on and on.
Well, but the point is they're really not the same thing. I don't mean to argue with you. They're really not the same thing, but they certainly did work for each other.
Well, exactly.
have
That's
to
what
be
I
more
mean.
clear.
They utilized the mob just like they utilized other people in foreign countries. That was the criminal element to do what they had to do. And they were part where it was Roselli worked for them. Okay? And there we go. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Zack Shelton. Was that amazing?